So my name is Jeff Horne. I am the Chief Security Officer for a company called Ordr, and we basically secure IoT managed and unmanaged devices. From a speaking perspective, if you guys have any questions while I'm going through this, raise your hand. I'll always on you and just make sure that it's like fluid, because I just don't want to be sitting here talking. I'm apologizing, I'm a little bit hoarse, but I just got finished talking for about 2 hours. So yeah, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate. So does everybody here know IoT, IoMT, medical devices? Yeah. So we have seen an explosive growth in the last couple of years, just as these devices, medical devices, or something as simple as a camera or a television. They're not just mini computers. Like Linux operating systems, they've got full-fledged web services attached to them. And just from the explosive growth, we're seeing like 50 trillion gigabytes of data transacting over these devices. I'm going to be talking about the prevalence of IoT devices and IoT devices. But just wanted to set the stage. I wanted to show you guys that we did a study over the last year. It stopped in June, where we took all of our customers, and I would say that predominantly our customers are in healthcare, and then access the back-end systems in order to just kind of analyze what's going on inside the environment, more like almost a services fashion. And so they did part of the study. In the study, we localized it to just unmanaged IoT and medical devices. And so in this study, we saw about 5 million unmanaged IoT devices. And this is what we found. So in 20% of the points, we saw PCI violations in the sense that we either had encrypted information that is attached to some sort of card reader, or we had card readers that were in VLANs alongside medical equipment. 75% of the healthcare deployments that we saw had VLANs that had medical devices on basically segments they shouldn't be on. So I think a good example of this is we saw things like an ultrasound scanner that was on the same network as the vending machine was in a desktop area. So just from a segregation perspective, we were actually talking outside with the gentleman that some of the scanners the doctors are using now are connected via inventoried IPS devices, and they're just connected into the desktop. And so in 75% of the healthcare departments, we did see issues in the sense of how you can connect to these devices and what devices could communicate with these medical devices. So why is this a problem? I also want to say that a lot of the device manufacturers out there just do not have security behind these devices. So I've been a security professional for the last 21 years, and these right now are the top. LOS did a 2019 survey of IoT devices in terms of how they attack. These are the lists. So we can guessable and hard-coded passwords. Like I thought this was something we saw back in the 80s, right? These devices are coming with passwords that have username and passwords that cannot be changed, and they do literally one in one. And not necessarily these, big iron medical devices, but these, rinky-dink cameras that we're starting to see pop up in facilities are becoming a problem. Obviously, in secure services, I won't run through this list, but when you start analyzing these IoT devices, these televisions, cameras, medical devices, some of the security issues are just egregious. So during this deployment, we saw just under 20% of the medical devices running Windows 7. The amount of MRI machines that we saw running Windows XP SP0, I would say that was the majority. And when we reached out and asked, hey, how old are these machines? Obviously, if you're going to spend $250,000 on machines, probably not in a facility for quite a long time. And these things are 2 years old. They're still running Windows XP SP0, and they're not something that the providers are going to come up and say, oh yeah, well, absolutely, we can operate these things to Windows IoT or to an operating system that doesn't have thousands of vulnerabilities attached to it. So in one organization, we actually saw 7,000 devices running Windows XP. And you know, although I don't have to explain why that's a bad when you're doing with an unsupported operating system. Microsoft is going to look at So during this deployment, during this study, we also saw a lot of devices that were behaving bad. So, you know, either road communications, obviously things like the malware and the operating systems. We saw a couple of devices that were trying to just set line, which was not necessarily malicious, but obviously we think CPU and compute cycles on these devices. And then, you know, obviously we're talking about VLAN segregation and monitored connections. We had a couple of devices that were reaching out to China and North Korea and malicious management. So, and we're not necessarily talking about just IoT devices, but these IoT hybrid devices, like nursing workstations that deliver meds that also have a keyboard, mouse, and monitor attached to it. So in that case, we were saying just use those devices to serve YouTube Facebook, which obviously is not ideal, but why is this device doing this? 95% of the healthcare deployments had Amazon echoes. I thought this was super interesting. We ended up reaching out to them and saying, hey, you know, figuring out locations like, why do you have Amazon echoes there? Because you're literally an Alexa away from potentially, you know, capturing PHI, right? Like being able to say, Alexa, I've just been diagnosed with whatever, that's definitely an issue. But also, these, did anybody hear about the checkpoint issue with the Alexas that happened this week? So just a simple cross-site request forgery. People could take over Amazon Alexas, and this came out, I think, 4 days ago. So this wasn't necessarily an issue with the Alexa device itself. It was an issue with Amazon's backend. That if I sent you a iMessage or a SMS message, and you had your Amazon account attached with the Alexa app attached on that phone, I could steal the token and then install skills onto Amazon Alexa. And then that's essentially executing on code at that point, because I can add a skill to turn off all the lights in your house or to basically if you want any word other than Alexa. And so there's an error there. So when we asked them for organizations why they had these Amazon Alexas in there, they were using it for music. So they were sitting right there on the reception desk. They were just playing some light music, or there was these relaxing rooms. I guess they were deployed in. They were playing lots of music. But you know, that becomes an issue because you literally don't listen to music. We saw a lot of Pelotons. So Pelotons were big. A lot of the nursing and staff started bringing in their Teslas and connecting them to the corporate Wi-Fi network versus the desk Wi-Fi network, because I guess it was faster. And so, you know, and these, you know, Teslas pull down updates every month, and they'll just wait to say, oh, I've got to get an internet connection. And now you've got, you know, a gigabyte package being sucked down at 3 parts of the parking lot. We also saw things that the organizations really didn't understand were computers in the first place. So we had one that was an elevator control system that was running, I believe it was a Linux operating system, but the elevator crew was a third party company came in and was like, oh yeah, I'll just reconnect this with the Wi-Fi access point and plug this into the switch. And they just didn't get it. And these obviously those devices from a security perspective, you're going to want to know what attached they do they get attached, how do they need to be isolated, what is their communication need, etc. So in terms of trying to understand the security lifecycle, you have these devices that run almost full-fledged operating systems. You can't install an endpoint on it because you can't sit there and say, hey, CrowdStrike, I want you to start deploying your instances, your L5 install on Trinidad cameras of that facility. It just doesn't happen. So what do you need to do from a lifecycle perspective in order to protect these devices, given that some of them can be patched, some of them can't be patched, some of them run operating systems that are legacy and cannot be updated, and some of them actually have hard-coded passwords, or in the medical case, we don't see a lot of medical devices that run hard-coded passwords, but we see a lot of medical devices devices that use default private keys on every one of the devices. So you buy a device from the manufacturer, it's going to come with an encryption key that's baked inside of it. But that encryption key is the same for that device and every device that that device manufacturer has produced on that model. And the reason that's a problem is you can literally just take a couple screws out of the box. Has anybody ever played with dumping firmware or hooking something up on like a JTAG port on a device before? Right, so you take some screws, take out the back of the box, usually have a JTAG port on there. You can plug a device that would just dump the firmware, and that firmware will include those keys. So as a security researcher, that's incredibly easy for me to do. You probably didn't make a couple of hours. But now I've got a private key that exists that allows me to point traffic across the entire healthcare organization through our use of that device. So I would say that's less of a risk than a default username and password plus maybe authenticate, but not much, especially when there's people who go, oh yeah, I'm sure this key has the account of traffic for this devices. So I'm going to take you through each one of these in my section. So obviously, from the discovery perspective, you cannot protect, you cannot manage what you don't know about. So being able to have visibility on the network is absolutely critical. It's the foundation of all of this. And one of the issues that I see with modern organizations is that the asset inventory is not up to date as much as it needs to be. And so I know asset inventory is not the sexiest thing from a security perspective, but it's absolutely foundation base of IT security or just any security you know what's there. And so I guess this is kind of like a loaded question. But how do everybody here help me to say that if the CIO, somebody came into your office and said, hey, I need to know every device on this network that happened this hour, would everybody just be able to say that? It wouldn't be like a device that, you know, they brought in, or they have an iPhone pocket type of thing that's going to try to connect to inventory. So that's an issue, right? I mean, I think from a content management database perspective, asset inventory perspective, I think the current thinking is that we have slices of what's on, right? In a previous rollout, I want to scan every night. So like 2 a.m. in the morning, I was running a rapid seven scan throughout the network, and that would happen. But the problem is I got sales guys bringing a laptop in the morning, and if they're not going to do this, or I've got the EA turns off all the power on televisions in the Ordr, I'm not going to see that in the screen. So, it's not necessarily a flaw, but changing that over to a passive process, just listening on the wire to figure out what's there, that is definitely a path. Is listening on core pieces like the core infrastructure of the network and figuring out what is the issue. So being able to have a real asset inventory that is real time is absolutely key, particularly with these IoT devices that come online, offline. And at the same time, bolster like scan. In the medical field, I see this all the time where you have manufacturers, large manufacturers, like, do not scan this. If you scan this MRI machine is just going to fall over with the simplest thing. We're sometimes restricted from pinging a single ICMP packet to these things pretty quickly. And that's, obviously a problem. But at the same time, like, you always sit there and run aggressive scan across the network, and all of a sudden all of your infusion pumps go off. So being able to discover and classify devices is absolutely key to this. Obviously you can sit there and listen to the network, a layer 2, layer 3 perspective, and get all of the IP addresses and packs. But like everyone has iPhone. Nothing changes the MAC address from a wireless interface perspective every day. Like you don't have a stable MAC. This is not something we're seeing definitely in the medical devices where they're changing their MAC. But if you've got dynamic post configuration protocols, these things are just coming up with different IP addresses. You need to be able to have more than just a map reverse to figure out, okay, well, this is a Samsung device, or this is an iOS device, or this is a GE device. So being able to listen and understand what that device is the key to kind of live passive detection. Because you can detect and say, hey, I've got this many IPs, or I've got this many IP leases, and I've got these MAC addresses on the network. But you need to understand the difference between, an iPhone, MRI machine, or a TriNet camera and a Samsung television board. So that's absolutely key to understand what you have on your network and how it's communicated. So, how many servers do I have? How many reliable operating systems? From a managed device perspective, like workstations and servers, how many of them have NDRs installed? How many of them have the CrowdStrike regional EDR system installed? And that doesn't always mean that you have to recognize this from each box. There's something as simple as to this kind of reach out to the CrowdStrike servers in one hour, because that's the TTP for that thing that exists every night. They'll try to mash that network. It's like, hey, here's all the Windows machines with my AV EDR stuff on it. Here's all the stuff. So discover and classify as an example here. These are, I kind of created this presentation, I want to pick on these machines because they run legacy operating systems. In one case it's Windows 7, and the other case it's an x64 version of Windows XP. But I've seen at least 2 cases where these machines get infected with ransomware. They're distributing a water drive or network, and that is just not a situation that you want to be in when you sit there and you've got a massive property piece of ransomware going through your network, and it's coming from your alarm machine. It's just a horrible situation. So, being able to understand passively over the wire without scanning, this is the type of data that you want to be able to pull. What OS is running? How is it communicated? What machines are that with? Does it switch its network? Does it change its IP? You need people to have relative context here. And then also, where is it plugged in? Like, is it Wi-Fi? Is it plugged into a switch? If it's a switch, what type of switch? And if this switch, like, I'm doing it because at the end of the day, on the security guard, it's affected water drive. If I can't sit there and, like, with a few keystrokes, turn that port off, turn that machine off, I'm screwed. Like, I'm gonna have to get some political engineer to go in there and start pulling plugs, and that's not ideal. Are there any questions so far? Stop. So, understanding, that's part of our discovery, understanding how these devices communicate. We are extremely lucky that these IoT devices, IoT devices, the freedom, they're not a person behind the workstation surfing Facebook and doing all these crazy things. They're reaching out to a central server. In a camera's case, they're reaching out to a streaming service or a streaming server. In the MRI's case, maybe they're talking to the exchange in a weird system in order to say, hey, this is when my images are done, but they're usually connected to some piece of equipment over, using DICOM and shifted images back and forth to the server. So, at the end of the day, that MRI machine should not be pivoting and talking to some sort of Amazon backend. Or something. So being able to understand not only how these things communicate internally, but externally is extremely important to build communication baselines. Because this is how you start discovering right? If my television starts beaconing out to some proxy in North Korea, that's cool, right? That something is on that TV that's beating out or not user on the screen. And also, like, I like TVs as a good example of this, just because people don't understand or oftentimes people don't understand, what the attack surface could be in the sense of the network. Obviously, people put firewalls on the perimeter. If you're supporting a workforce, you're putting RDP-centric services or whatever on the perimeter. But then also, too, like the localized attacks in the sense of like it's plugged in from off board or showing up with a Wi-Fi pineapple trying to spoof your SSIDs. We've seen several attacks where a TV has just been one of these like little universal remotes. Somebody would just go, hey, I'm going to go to a web browser on the TV with an IR remote, and they can do it. They can do it outside the building through a window. And then this website, this is a Samsung television. It runs a Linux, Linux operating system. I'm going to send it to this website that has a network payload specifically for that, and how that's plugged into your network. So those are the types of things that change people's thinking about like how do I protect these devices? And I need to know what they are. I need to know what they're vulnerable. I need to know if they can be patched. And also need to know, obviously, the slide, what because I'm really kind of like, I'm getting to the point of segmentation in the network. So launching the segmentation from a security perspective is kind of the end part of this whole presentation. But you can't really do that. You can't really do that successfully if you don't know what you're preventing, right? If you've got an MRI machine and it has to come to this machine, once a month, you need to know that just so you don't cause a situation from an IT perspective that limits patient care. So after you're baselining your traffic, you can start discussing, okay, well, do I allow it to kind of open up? Do I keep it on a flat network? From a device perspective, are these things, I'm seeing it reach out to these 2 or 3 servers every so often. It's updates from something that's on back end. You can then start figuring out in the top report, you start figuring out what things are being disturbed. Obviously, any sort of malicious call outs, you can see that actually on the edge. But if it's trying to do any sort of scanning on the interior, some of the stuff just pulls stuff in unnecessary waste morning, particularly with malicious payloads, and we'll just start scanning local subnets. And so being able to see that internally is really important. All of a sudden your MRI machine starts, in mapping your entire layer 3 subnet. It's a problem to jump on. So being able to analyze devices for vulnerabilities obviously requires you to know what firmware they're running, what software version they're running. And a lot of times, like I said, these devices cannot be actively probed. So a lot of these systems passively will be able to discover just off of external services or the way that they communicate what operating system they're running, what protocols they're using, down to the firmware level, what firmware level that they're running, just based off of communication chain. So in medical equipment, it's very common that you have a central distribution point where you're pushing stuff in, you have something over the wire, and you actually see that payload being distributed to that medical device. In GE's case, they'll reach out to random services in either Azure or AWS or their own systems in the United States or Japan, and they'll pull stuff down, but those packages are not encrypted in a way where you couldn't pick out the serial or not part of the payload. You'll say, oh yeah, it just got this patch 2 minutes ago. And obviously, unless you're on the device, you can't figure out if it's patching at a time, but then all of a sudden it starts waking up and communicating with other servers. You're like, okay, well, that actually is patched. And so being able to, at that granular level, passively detect what firmware version it's on, allows you to apply all sorts of metrics to it, particularly on like data recalls, which we see a ton of. I think the average during the IoMT study that we did for a year, I think the average was 10. Every hospital had 10 machines that had active recalls. Okay, just looking at So being able to, and I think I kind of touched on this a second ago, but being able to know down to the firmware and software level for these devices is important, just to make sure that you know what patch level you need to use. Because if a patch is available, that's an easy way to fix, right? Down to the patch and apply. Usually these things, particularly if there's thousands of them, they usually have some sort of patch distribution that everybody's aware of. But in the case of televisions, unfortunately, it's something where it requires major intervention. It's not automatically done. You've got to go to the LGTV and download the software update. It's kind of pain, but being able to know that you've got that environment is really, really important if it's available. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the CVSS story or, in terms of risks towards vulnerabilities. I can say that, from our Ordr product, we definitely use the CVSS scoring in initial rate, kind of low, medium, and high. And using the scoring method, so, using our device or any of the scanning devices or any devices picking up passive information to tell them what serial numbers, firmware models, and software versions are on. Being able to understand the risk severity allows you to obviously prioritize which machines or which devices you can touch first. And if you've got a Windows XP SP0 machine that has to connect to the internet, well, you've got some critical things that are common operating system. You probably focus on this first and make sure this communication is secure. But obviously, if you're dealing with just some suspicious or anomalous traffic that's going to some AWS backend that you've never seen before, being able to put the proper appropriate risk, which I think is like, a no good state effort in my instance, but I guess from a low medium perspective, doing the FDA recall notices, like that's obviously important to know. You got a device that's been recalled, they usually have things that you can mitigate on there, or you can start looking into the purchase plan. Hey, maybe this is something we can replace in the next year or two. So being able to have this level of visibility, this level of analysis on the network allows you to answer really, really important questions. Does that get like the CIO comes into the room? Isn't there other CIOs in here? I think not CIOs, but as a CISO, I'm usually paired at the hip from the executive team perspective with my CIO. And the amount of times that I've tried to do like my CIO will come in and be like, hey, Jeff, how many Windows XP machines do I have? I can tell you, like when we go to Splunk, I can tell you, but this is obviously something that I would expect you to be able to answer. But being able to say like how many Nexus do I have? That's obviously important. How many old operating systems? And of those old operating systems, how many are going to be patched? And out of those old operating systems, how many can be patched? And what is my mitigated approach for those? So being able to answer those important questions is really just from a job perspective. Because you wouldn't be very much of a security person if you didn't know what's on the network. And all of a sudden you've got a malware outbreak, you're like, it's coming from the TV, but I don't have any bias in inventory, I don't know what switches going on. Now 50 minutes into a property well. So I did mention WannaCry earlier. Are people familiar with ransomware at all? Okay, so I had a few people say no. So ransomware it's not necessarily a new attack. It's been definitely like for the last 10 years. But what it does is it typically gets onto your network. A lot of attackers will use very common exploits to break through regular assets. So WannaCry used a remote desktop vulnerability, and this was particularly bad during the pandemic because more and more companies were putting externally facing resources in order to facilitate remote workforce. And all of a sudden, you got vulnerable services on the edge. These guys were just sitting there using a 6-month-old exploit, these packages and that exploit beautifully, just to hit the button. It gets installed. They deliver a payload, and this payload is designed to spread through 1 to 4 very common exploits. In WannaCry's case, it uses a SMB exploit that's affects SMB1 and SMB2, which definitely includes those Windows XP machines. But there's a lot of common Windows machines, like Windows 10, which still supports SMB2, in the sense that if you're familiar with kind of like TLS deprecation, if you've got devices on the network that have to use SMB1 or SMB2, your devices now have to deprecate in order to communicate over SMB to those devices. So you still have devices that are vulnerable to this if you're not being patched yourself. So anyway, they would deliver this payload. It would be incredibly pervasive throughout the network as long as these devices were vulnerable. In some cases, they would report back to the operators, the attackers, with trying to get additional information. So in a couple of cases, we definitely saw the administrator password for Active Directory and all of the local boxes were actually all the same. And using the tags, the operators were able to dump the memory at certain points and then run the administrator password to still log into some boxes, and then use the administrator password in order to authenticate to every device in the network. And now they essentially see dollar share on every Windows device and put it out and ran it with PSXM. And it brought it all. You now have this thing on your network that looks for important pieces of information, images, PDFs, documents, anything, and encrypts them with currently unbreakable encryption. So you can't break it. You don't have to use to break it. And they will provide the keys to it. And then they say, hey, you're going to pay me $100,000 of Bitcoin to get the key to unlock your files. And I've seen small businesses destroyed like this. I mean, I worked at a dentist office that this guy, he inherited a dentist practice with about 4 locations from his father and got infected with ransomware, and it erased, essentially or locked every patient file, every x-ray that his father had, everything. And he would have to have gotten all of the patients back, all of these images. And in that case, that person was very, very lucky because they used a malware variant that actually kept the key in memory when it was trying to encrypt. And so we were able to take that key and apply it to it. Like we didn't actually have to take a ransom, but this is something that I find that affects a lot of hospitals. And I mean, it's definitely been in the news. WannaCry, Petya, there's a bunch of flavors of these, and they're affecting hospitals mainly because of these the prevalence of these unpatched or unpatched operating systems, particularly in this SP0. So this is where I start getting into network segmentation. Who doesn't know anything about network segmentation? At least okay, so I will definitely kind of walk through this at not a layer 2 crazy technical level, but please just raise your hand if you have any questions whatsoever. So in our study we did for over a year, we found that 90% of the hospitals had medical devices present on VLANs that didn't have medical devices on. So it was like workstations. So in that case, you have computers that are adjacent and can connect to a computer or a medical device within their own. And why that can be a bad thing is that in the case of WannaCry, you've got an MRI machine that is connected to the same VLAN as your HR workstations. That MRI machine can start tapping your HR workstations. And you can kind of just extract this to how many workstations do you have in your network, what segmentations do you have, physical segmentations that prevent traffic from touching other segments. So being able to identify the traffic patterns for these IoT devices, and because their traffic is largely deterministic, allows you to apply security context to network segmentation. I would say in hospitals, I usually see network segmentation in a very IT logical way. So, if you're an IT person and you're trying to set up segments in the network, either from like a layer 2 or layer 3 perspective, it's usually like I have a layer 3 subnet, so like a 192.168.1, and class C for all of my HR, right? But if I have a building with multiple floors, maybe I have a VLAN per floor, or maybe I have a layer 3 subnet for HR and doctors, engineers, nurses. It's logical segregation. And you can also kind of extract this to like a facility in Atlanta and a facility in St. Louis. And those are 2 segregated networks, but these can talk to one another. And so it's like geographic and logical segmentation. But rarely do we see segmentation that takes security into context and also device risk into context. So I have information that can never be patched. And I was running with this XP, and oh man, like it should not have access to my entire workstation, workstation workforce. So I like to use the analogy of the zoo for segregation. And obviously, if I went to this, it would be pretty fun, but it wouldn't last long. I mean, the kids would get eaten by the lions. The zebras would be gone, right? So if you're building a zoo, you want to be able to get the animals into kind of logical zones. So this is kind of what I was talking about. Typically in zoos, you see like, hey, you're the African Plains animals, right? You're going to see my rhino and my lions, but obviously my lions and gazelles are not really next to each other. And that analogy really works in terms of risk and device risk. You want to have geographic and logical zones, but you don't want to have your zebras and lions together. Right? You want to be able, and you want to keep everyone safe. So from a network segregation perspective, the zoo analogy really works, particularly with IoT devices that only need to communicate with 2 or 3 devices and don't need access to the entire network, or a television that needs access to the internet but doesn't need access to your executive staff outside of that work. Does that ring true? Does that make sense? So I won't go too much into this in terms of design philosophies around approaching segmentation, but simply you could think of it as I've got a network of 10,000 machines. How can I kind of logically separate it? And it makes sense to look at it and say, hey, from a geographic or from a switching infrastructure perspective, how these things would need to communicate. And when you're using kind of like this policy driven, this top-down approach of segmentation, that's where I kind of rarely see that security awareness, that security context of I would say the traditional way of like somebody else that says, hey, you do segmentation content. So being able to understand, visualize what's on the network, how everything communicates, what patch level allows you to start becoming a little bit more nimble with segmentation. So in segmentation, you've got layer 3 subnets and layer 2 VLANs that you can start playing around with. But these devices, these modern devices and secure devices, they're really integrated with these things. So in the sense of you've got Cisco lights or I'm not plugging black box, but if you have something like your Cisco environment, you bring in a phone, and I've never seen it before, you better believe you need to put that on an isolated sample. I've never seen this phone before. It doesn't meet any of my security recommendations, doesn't meet my security protocols. If it's jailbroken, I need to treat it completely differently. And those things, you've got, obviously that's kind of a bring your own device problem, but it still rings true for IoT devices. And so if you've got a device that comes out and comes down under that hasn't got the patch, you need to treat that device differently with the network. And these devices, like these modern devices, will do things automatically. Because obviously you can't have 1,000 IT people that are sitting there at your Cisco switch and go, oh, we got a new phone, let's type it in. Being able to say, okay, identify this device. This device is a new Alaris infusion pump. It was brought into the hospital. Okay, well, I need to treat it like other Alaris infusion pumps on the network. And either it's plugged in or communicating over the wireless network package. I need to be able to treat it like these other things, and I need to be able to do that autonomously without needing a direction. And so that is, I would say, the ultimate goal for these new modern devices, are to be able to classify them, identify them, and then once they get to the network, treat them with policies that match those devices. So one of the really cool things you can do if you've got a mature network segregation policy and you've got device discovery, you've got auto classification of devices, you can do this thing called emergency segmentation. And I've definitely done this in my history as a responder. But, let's say that you have a device with ransom, you have an NRI machine, and all of a sudden it starts acting strange, right? In one enterprise case, it just starts scanning the entire Class C subnet. 192.168.1 dot, and it's ocean 0, and goes all the way to wrong. That is anomalous. Okay, I need to get on top of that because it's trying to figure out what other machines in the network are communicating or have the SMB port open, and then which ones are running the version switch the slide. This is incredibly powerful because if I can have a device that can monitor the network, I've got a full asset inventory, I know what patch levels what's on, I know this device needs to be treated differently, and this is anomalous behavior, I can start turning some knowledge real quick. And I can start turning those knowledge at 3 o'clock in the morning completely autonomously. And that's to say, I can do something simple where it's like, hey, this device is communicating autonomously, and oh no, I just saw it do an SMB exploit against another machine. I'm going to pull the plug, and I am going to turn off that port on that switch that device is communicated with, and that device is not going to figure out what is going on. And I would say that that's a pretty traditional approach. But nowadays, we've got antiviruses, we've got these EDR agents that go out and remediate these things. You can do something really cool in the sense of, like, let's say that you have segregated people. You had a quarantine. And what I mean by that is you've got a network that the device can't communicate with any device on that. Except for a few that we chose. And the few that we chose would be the patching infrastructure, be it SCCM, BigFix, maybe the reporting for syslog and netlog, so maybe your SIEM infrastructure. And then, obviously, like your antivirus, if you've got AV or malware detonation resources, or you've got EDR agent, make sure that they communicate with those. And so now you don't necessarily have to have the machine offline. But you now have a quarantine in a place where you have all of your diagnostic tools that you can immediately apply to this thing to make sure that it's remediated and get the system back up as fast as possible. Because, I would say hospitals are a little different than like enterprise in the sense that, sometimes you don't have, like, your IT resources are right there. But I can tell you from an incident responder perspective, it really sucks when you're sitting there, you're working in Houston, and the device that's affecting your network is in Anchorage, Alaska, and you know anything. And so not being able to, like, I'm going to turn this box off means that I'm going to literally have to get somebody to go turn it back on. And that's just, I would say, not efficient. So being able to do something like doing an emergency segregation VLAN, have a VLAN or subnet that you have isolated on the network, and then you can swing these things over, regardless of what switching infrastructure you're using or what APs you're using, swing these things over to be remediated or some sort of definitely one of your experience classes is definitely kind of the next level in the sense of a reactionary approach to an infection or compromise, and being able to have all of your tools in one place, and also being able to handle it. So I know this topic, we were talking about like the effects of COVID-19 and basically what has happened in the last 6 months. And one of the problems that we definitely see just in terms of like protection, networking resources, I would say just overall issues in the healthcare system is that policies are being bent. And I would say bent in the right, right? Bent in a way where it's like get devices into the network to save people's lives as quickly as possible. Absolutely the right decision. You're saying that you're bringing in 100 ventilators, you don't want to have the security guy going, oh, I didn't see it, like that just doesn't happen, right? You're going to save people's lives. And so we've seen asset inventories essentially just destroyed over the last 6 months. People up in the woods. Devices are becoming extremely migratory, particularly in hotspots where hospitals are sharing equipment or traversing equipment. We've seen originally, like we saw a lot of ventilators going into hospitals in some facilities in New York, but they have policies in place where they weren't connecting them to the network, which, from a security perspective, that's a great thing. But the devices are now living in the network, and they're like, okay, well, we just need to connect these to the AV that's right there in order to be able to get patient monitoring. We definitely saw that with as the PPE protocols started to mature, more and more patient care is being not necessarily done remotely, but trying to have data outside the room, so you don't have to have a nurse or a doctor go into the room every time you need to check on final equipment. And so we have started to see these laboratory devices start getting connected to the network, and then also not included in the asset inventory. On top of that, I mean, you guys know, with the elimination of elective surgery, hospital profits have been absolutely falling. The last thing people are talking about right now is like, I need to go buy a new device, right, from a security perspective. I would say patient care is like pointing up here, and security is pointing up here. But at the end of the day, I am, at least in the healthcare organizations that I speak to regularly, I'm extremely optimistic, because I think that some of the old policies and protocols needed to be changed. I think they were old, and they didn't describe kind of what new systems that are out there, policies that were built for security back in like 1997. So being able to say, hey, look, we've done this for patient care, but let's bend it back and address it in the right way. So I'm incredibly optimistic here, but the majority of the things we're talking to for healthcare organizations is just get on top of the asset inventory, like know what is in the hospital, because these IoT and IoMT medical devices, they are unfortunately still riddled with inherent risk, be it unpatchable default passwords and keys, or running operating systems that just are inherently vulnerable and can't be touched.
How come the FDA hasn't jumped in on this and have manufacturers but do something? They could do this 10 years first start that.
I think that's a really good question. I think the right answer is they don't have the knowledge to do that. I mean, they can definitely sit there and say, hey, this device is vulnerable, and a lot of times the device manufacturers are pointing to them. Like, hey, we have an implantable medical device that some guy gave to us with a vulnerability, and we're reporting it to you, and they're just a dissemination point. But I would just say that, these interactions with the FDA, they don't have the expertise. They're not going to be sitting there going, hey, this thing needs to happen. You need to not have a JTAG port on this device when you release it. They just don't have the expertise. That was that. Any other questions?